Silence all electronic devices. Leading the Senate in prayer is Senator Mike Woodard of Durham County. All members and guests will please stand.
Please join me in prayer. Dear God, I pray today for the men and women of the North Carolina Senate. Reveal yourself to us and bring us closer to you, that we may hear your voice clearly and distinctly. Speak to us of truth, integrity, justice, and fairness. Show us the way to help others, to right wrongs, and to make our state a more beautiful place. I pray that you would bind our hearts together in ways we could not have imagined. Help us declare, as King David did, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. Amen.
Senator Heiss is recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Journal of June 19, 2023 has been examined and found to be correct. I move we dispense with the reading of the Journal and stands approved as written.
Without objection, the Journal for June 19, 2023 stands approved as written. Members, a leave of absence is requested and without objection is granted for Senator Murdoch. And courtesies of the floor are extended today to Ms. Reagan Perry. Reagan is the daughter of Senator Jim Perry. Welcome, Reagan. Hope you enjoy your time here today. Thank you for being with us. Introduction of pages. It's time for the pages to come around for their introduction. And the clerk will read.
Katie Brand, Raleigh. Allie Breyer, Charlotte. Al Butler, Wilmington. Ava Custer, Raleigh. Chesney Gibson, Grover. Grayson Harmon, Apex. Connor Lang, Raleigh. Mason Menning, Raleigh. Mackenzie Moran Bates, Cary. Luke Pannenbacker, Morrisville. Luca Pass, Winston-Salem. Marley Swanner, Oxford. Keith Tillett II, Fayetteville.
And we want to thank you for being with us this week. Hope that you will enjoy your time here in your North Carolina Senate. Get to know your sponsor. Ask them questions. I'm sure they'll give you the correct answer. So thank you for being with us this week. I believe it is time to go to the calendar unless there's other business. Senator Raven, for what purpose you rise?
Motion, please, Mr. President.
State your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. The governor has vetoed the following bills and returned them to the Senate. Senate Bill 299, reimburse late audit costs with sales tax revenue. Senate Bill 329, Retail Installment Sales Act amendments. Senate Bill 331, Consumer Finance Act amendments. Move that these bills be recalled from the Rules Committee and placed on the end of today's calendar.
So ordered. Okay, local bill for concurrence, Senate Bill 126. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 126, City of Asheville parking meter proceeds.
Is there discussion or debate on this motion to concur in this local bill? Senator Daniel, for what purpose you rise?
Speak to the motion.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just would ask the members to concur in this bill. The House made a good change, and so I ask for your concurrence.
Further discussion or debate? Hearing none, question for the Senate is the motion to concur in the House Committee Substitute Senate Bill 126. All in favor will vote aye. We're going to do this by a voice vote. Question for the Senate is the motion to concur in the House Committee Substitute Senate Bill 126. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed no. The ayes have it, and the motion to concur does carry. The bill will be enrolled. Public Bill, second reading, House Bill 168. The clerk will read.
House Bill 168, DNCR Agency Bill AB.
Senator Johnson is recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, before we get into the bill, Mr. President, I do have an amendment. It should be on the dashboard.
Send forward your amendment. Clerk will read.
Senator Johnson moves to amend the bill.
Senator Johnson is recognized to explain Amendment 1.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is truly a technical correction. One of the words had a single underline and it needed a double underline. I would would appreciate your support.
Discussion or debate on Amendment 1? Hearing none. Question for the Senate is the passage of Amendment 1 to House Bill 168. All in favor will vote aye. All opposed vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the vote, and clerk will record the vote. Senator Craven, aye. 48 having voted in the affirmative, 1 in the negative. The amendment is adopted, and the bill is back before us. Senator Johnson to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is the Dancer Agency Bill. Most of it is just cleanup and codifying current practices. I would point your attention to Section 3, which just it says that prison records after 100 years would be eligible to be researched unless it met one of the exceptions in there. And Section 6 would say that it clarifies that camping and other temporary lodging at state parks are not a hotel in regards to the Umstead Act. Section number 13, this is the majority of the words of the bill. This is just a provision that we run every year or so to add the highest level of protection for state park land. And this would be adding some that we've acquired and then removing some that we've sold. Appreciate your support and stand for any questions.
Discussion or debate? Hearing none, question for the Senate is the passage on second reading of the Senate Committee Substitute to House Bill 168. All in favor will vote aye. All opposed will vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the vote, and clerk will record the vote. (49) having voted in the affirmative, none in the negative. House Bill 168 has passed its second reading and will, without objection, be read a third time.
The General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
Is there discussion or debate on third reading? Hearing none, question for the Senate is the passage on third reading of House Bill 168. All in favor will say aye. Aye. All opposed no. The ayes have it, and House Bill 168 has passed its third reading. The amendment will be engrossed. The bill will be returned to the House on the issue of concurrence. House Bill 455. The clerk will read.
House Bill 455, expedite wastewater franchise transfer.
Senator Barnes is recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is the House version of Senate Bill 95, which we passed unanimously in this chamber. The House version requires the purchaser to have a pre-application conference with the Utilities Commission and the public staff. And the other difference is that it allows the applicant to waive the expedited process. I know of no opposition, and I would ask for your support.
Discussion or debate? Hearing none, the question for the Senate is the passage of House Bill 455 on its second reading. All in favor will vote aye. All opposed vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the vote, and clerk will record the vote. 49 having voted in the affirmative, none in the negative. House Bill 455 has passed its second reading and will, without objection, be read a third time.
The General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
Discussion or debate on third reading. Hearing none, question for the Senate is a passage on third reading of House Bill 455. All in favor will say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and House Bill 455 has passed its third reading, will be enrolled and sent to the governor. Members, a leave of absence is requested and without objection is granted for Senator Blue for the remainder of the session. House Bill 574, the clerk will read.
House Bill 574, Fairness in Women's Sports Act.
Senator Corbin is recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this bill is the companion bill to Senate Bill 631 that we passed out of this chamber, debated thoroughly several days ago. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. I would just say a couple of things. I did run an amendment in committee to the House bill. Did two things. The amendment excludes intramural sports from this bill. It also makes it clear that girls are allowed to play boys' sports under this bill. There's no provision to keep them from doing that. And I would just say, as I said a couple of weeks ago, frankly, members, this is a very common sense bill. It's not against anybody. It simply does this. It simply prevents biological males from playing girls' sports. End of story. That's what this bill does, and I would appreciate you voting for it. Thank you.
Discussion or debate? Senator Grafstein, for what purpose you rise?
To debate the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Happy Pride Month. June is Pride Month. And Pride Month was born of the 1969 Stonewall Uprising. The impetus for that uprising was it was a resistance to raids that were happening on a regular basis against bars in New York City, excuse me, that catered to the LGBTQ community. And at the time, it was actually illegal to have a liquor license if you catered to the gay community. Legend is that the movement was started by Marsha P. Johnson, a trans woman who was tired of the harassment that she'd been experiencing. And on June 28th of that year, 1969, she started the long process of fighting back. At that time, LGBTQ people were not able to be as open about their identities as we are now, especially trans people, and that remains true. As a result, just the fact that someone was in such a bar where these raids were occurring could be used to destroy their careers and their lives. So Pride is about visibility. That's the purpose of Pride. In recent decades, there's been a lot of talk about the need for LGBTQ people to come out as a means of visibility. And the idea is that visibility matters, and it's harder to discriminate against or dislike someone or hate someone if they're a member of your family or your community, someone you already know and like or love. And by the way, that's why the idea of straight pride is sort of silly. We see straight people everywhere holding hands and smooching in public and stuff like that. We get it. You're here and you're going to smooch each other, and that's fine. There's no need to flaunt it any further. Pride and visibility have worked to a large extent, especially for some who are more privileged. But and visibility does matter. It matters in the same way that sunshine is the best disinfectant. Pride is about sunshine and light. It's about being out in the open and how it allows people to grow into their full selves. Bills, as we've talked about before, bills that target the LGBTQ community, whether intentionally targeting people or not, these are meant to erase us, to shroud the whole idea of being LGBTQ and especially trans in darkness. This bill in particular, and ones like it, are a reflection of a dark but familiar political tactic. Groups get demonized when it's politically useful, treated as fundamentally inferior or defective or non-existent. They get erased. And that's why we keep hearing the phrase biological male instead of trans woman. It's because that sort of disrespect is currently useful in political rhetoric. It sets up a tidy us and them. So I want to be clear that trans women are women. Calling a trans woman a biological male also has an added political bonus in this context. It says that trans women are not women, and therefore we don't need to care about fairness to them. And in some ways it's really clever, right? It's a clever turn of phrase, but it's sort of not clever in a North Carolina homegrown kind of way. It's a cooked up in a DC think tank kind of clever. It's a cynical, national, poll-driven strategy kind of clever. This bill originated in a closed room somewhere in one of the dark corners of our politics on a national level. It's designed to tap into a human impulse toward dehumanizing people we don't understand, or when we need to view some other group as less than or somehow dangerous. We've seen this many times before in our history, certainly in the racial history of our country, a history that we then in the future try to erase, but that's getting ahead of some bills. Apparently, some will always use that impulse that people have to score political points. And until it's no longer useful, they'll keep doing it, or until there's a new target. Trans people poll test better as targets now, and we know this on a national scale. Many people are genuinely confused and curious about what it means to be trans. We could use our leadership positions to foster conversation and understanding. We could support efforts to find common ground and genuine fairness for everyone, for all women. But instead, we're going to beat up on a small group because of a nationalized agenda to dehumanize them for political points. Over time, there's been a lot of progress for the LGBTQ community, and that progress will continue. And there will continue to be bigotry and demonization, and it will slowly recede, though, into the corners until it's no longer polite to call a trans woman a biological male, in the same way that other slurs aren't used in public as much outside certain circles. And the overt political attacks may become more subtle or even disappear, but that's only because the political calculation will have changed. So there's progress ahead, but it's not a fully happy ending. But I take pride in being part of a people who continue to insist on being fully human, even in the face of efforts to dehumanize us. And I appreciate Senator Corbyn's comments that this is not targeting anybody. I really do. And I think that we have to look at the reality of how this plays out in people's lives and the efforts that have gone on to try to make it possible for people to be visible and to grow in their lives. So while I take your point sincerely, I have to insist that we not continue to dehumanize trans people. Mr. President, happy Pride Month.
Senator Chaudhary, for what purpose you rise?
Speaking of the bill, Mr. President.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to thank the bill sponsor, Senator Corbyn, for providing me a generous handful of jelly beans before session started this today. And I also want to acknowledge from the outset that the so-called problem that this bill seeks to address is complicated. But I'm not willing to accept an absolute ban as a solution. I'm not willing to accept a patchwork of state laws passed by other Republican-controlled legislatures that upend high school and college athletics. And I'm certainly not willing to accept language that sometimes surrounds this bill that singles out a small number of kids and instills fear, whether intentional or not, as Senator Grafstein mentioned. Mr. President, the so-called fairness in women's sports bill isn't really about fairness. It's unwarranted, unworkable, unfair, and unkind to transgender high school and college students. First, this bill is unwarranted because it's a solution in search of a problem. Out of the 180,000 high school athletes, exactly 2 transgender female athletes have applied to play sports in our state. We've elected to hold committee hearings and floor debates on 2 different bills because of exactly 2 high school athletes. And let me reference Republican Utah Governor Spencer Cox, who made the same argument in his veto message of a similar bill. Governor Cox pointed out that out of the 75,000 kids participating in high school sports in Utah, 4 trans athletes and only 1 plays a girls' sports. He wrote in his veto message, 4 kids and only one of them playing girls sports. That's what all of this is about. 4 kids who aren't dominating or winning trophies or taking scholarships. 4 kids who are trying to find friends and feel like they are part of something. 4 kids trying to get through each day. In our state, we're talking about 2 kids trying to get through each day. And furthermore, Mr. President, I'd like to reference our own Speaker of the House, who also argued that such a bill is unwarranted. Speaker Moore said exactly the same thing. He said this bill is a solution in search of a problem. Just 2 years ago, he told the press, we're not really hearing any complaints about where it's an issue. This bill is unwarranted. Second, this bill is unworkable. As I've said in the Senate Rules Committee, as Senator Mayfield has said in the Rules Committee, we have respective governing athletic bodies that have established a process and determined the participation of transgender high school and college athletes case-by-case basis for both high school athletes and college athletes. The North Carolina High School Athletic Association requires a potential athlete to complete an 8-step checklist of gathering documents that are then reviewed by the Athletic Association's committee. In April, the National Collegiate Athletic Association updated the transgender student participation policy that aligns with the U.S. Olympic Committee. The NCAA's approach is a sports-by-sports, case-by-case basis that balances fairness, inclusivity, and safety as opposed to an absolute ban that this bill proposes. Unfortunately, in the end, this bill contributes to a patchwork of state laws that upends the uniformity we need for college athletics. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, this bill is unkind and unfair. The arguments about such bills being characterized as unfair don't come just from me. As I've mentioned before, they come from other Republican governors such as Eric Holcomb of Indiana, who vetoed a similar bill. Here's what he wrote in his veto message. The presumption of the policy laid in this bill is that there is an existing problem in K-12 sports in Indiana that requires further state government intervention. It implies that the goals of consistency and fairness in competitive female sports are currently not being met. After thorough review, I find no evidence to support either claim, even if I support the overall goal. As Governor Holcomb said, again, he found no evidence to support the claim of consistency or fairness. And this bill is unkind. It's unkind because, as Republican Governor Cox of Utah reminds us, rarely has so much fear and anger been directed at so few. It's unkind because, as we've heard over and over again in committee, the bill conveys, whether intentional or not, a hostile message to the LGBT youth who are prone to suicide. And it's unkind because I think back to a recent meeting I had with a transgender female athlete who moved to our state because we did not engage in culture wars, but then shared with me, full of tears, how she no longer feels welcome. And what do I say to her? What do we say to her? What do we say to company after company who have announced thousands and thousands of jobs over the last few years, but now these companies may be unable to recruit the talent to fill these job vacancies because human resource directors feel calls about our state not being a welcome and safe state? The argument I make today, Mr. President, don't come just from Democrats. They come from Republican governors of Indiana, Republican governor of Utah, and yes, even the North Carolina Speaker of the House, because they all recognize that an inviting and welcoming state is not just good for our diverse citizens, but it's good for business. I urge you to vote against this bill.
Further discussion or debate? Hearing none, question for the Senate is the passage on second reading of the Senate Committee Substitute to House Bill 574. All in favor will vote aye. All opposed will vote no. 5 seconds will be allowed for the voting. Clerk will record the vote. (31) Having voted in the affirmative, 17 in the negative, House Bill 574 has passed its second reading and will, without objection, be read a third time.
The General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
Is there discussion or debate on third reading? Hearing none, question for the Senate is passed on third reading of House Bill 574. All in favor will say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and House Bill 574 has passed its third reading and will be returned to the House on the issue of concurrence. House Bill 618, the clerk will read.
House Bill 618, Charter School Review Board.
Senator Galey is recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill would convert the current Charter Schools Advisory Board into the Charter Schools Review Board. The makeup of the board would not change. There would still be 11 voting members, 4 from the Senate, 4 from the House, 2 from the State Board of Education, and the Lieutenant Governor's Office. The Superintendent of the Department of Public Instruction would continue to be a non-voting member. The current advisory board makes no final decisions. It makes recommendations to the State Board of Education on rules, reviews applications, and makes recommendations for final approval. And it makes recommendations regarding renewals and non-renewals and revocations. Under this bill, the State Board of Education will continue to establish all rules for operation and approval of charter schools. It will continue to allocate funds and ensure accountability for finances and student performance. This bill changes the decision-making process for charter schools. The new advisory board would approve or deny charter applications, renewals, and revocations. However, the applicant or charter school or the superintendent could appeal that decision to the State Board of Education. So the State Board of Education would continue to have the final decision-making authority on the approval of charter applications, renewals, revocations, and amendments. And colleagues, I think about this in terms of like a unit of local government. You have the zoning board, which makes a decision, and then there's a right of appeal to the governing board, whether it's the city council or the county commission. We have the similar structure with the courts of appeal, appealing. You don't have an automatic right of appeal to the Supreme Court. You have to fit into a certain designation. So the bill aligns the Charter Review Board with similar structures that we find throughout our government, and I commend it to you. Thank you.
Before we get to further debate on this bill, it is now a little bit after 5, and our pages are scheduled to leave at this time. Pages, you are dismissed for the day. Thank you for being with us today. House Bill 618, second reading, further discussion or debate. Senator Robinson, for what purpose you rise?
To speak on the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And to members of the General Assembly, I think you all received a letter from Eric Davis, who's chair of the State Board of Education, in response to this proposed change. And I hope you read the part at the beginning where he says that the responsibility for administering and supervising free public education in this state belongs to the State Board of Education. This bill changes that. And first, it opens up North Carolina for a lawsuit. But more importantly, it changes who's responsible for making sure that all kids in this state receive free public education. Now, my concern with this, and some of you were not here when some of this started changing in terms of the charter schools, changing the numbers to an unlimited number of charters. And since that change, it is critically important that we maintain and support the authority of the State Board of Education. The Charter Advisory Committee, that board has been responsible for receiving and recommending new charter applicants, as well as looking at those that are not performing. This bill changes that to give them final authority with limited appeal to the State Board of Education. That should not be the case, especially since that board comprises of a lot of individuals who either are on the boards of the charter schools, some who themselves are heads of those charter schools. To me, that's a conflict of interest anyway, different from our State Board of Education. But given the final authority to a group who themselves run charters, are on the board, heads of them, in terms of approving who can and cannot run a charter. That's a direct conflict of interest. It should not be changed. If you hear from the chair of State Board of Education in terms of his disagreement, which represents the State Board of Education, I don't see how this body could support this kind of change because it's a direct conflict of interest. It should not happen. We should not be doing this. I support some charters, yes, that are good charters, that teach children as they should and have good outcomes. All of them are not good charters. And we ought to have oversight by the authority that is given that authority by the Constitution. Now, if you want to change the Constitution, then we need to send that to the citizens. However, we should not be doing this and giving final authority except for a limited appeal, and he says that in his letter to the State Board of Education. I think this is a bad move. If we want to have good education in this state, we ought to make sure that the State Board of Education that we've given the final authority to ought to make sure that all children receive that education. We should vote against this bill.
Further discussion or debate? Hearing none, the question for the Senate is the passage on second reading of the Senate Committee substitute to House Bill 618. All in favor will vote aye. All opposed vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the voting. Clerk will record the vote. Having voted in the affirmative, 18 in the negative. House Bill 618 has passed its second reading and will, without objection, be read a third time.
The General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
Members, before we get to third reading, the board on this side of the chamber has a malfunction with Senator Waddell's and Senator Woodard's lights being on. We are having that looked at. It is not something that is affecting the calculation of the votes when we vote, but it is apparently a hardware problem. So I think Senator Woodard wants to see where his light is on. So. All right, so back to House Bill 618. Discussion or debate on third reading? Hearing none, the question for the Senate is the passage on third reading of House Bill 618. All in favor will say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and House Bill 618 has passed its third reading and will be returned to the House on the issue of concurrence. House Bill 627, the clerk will read.
House Bill 627, on-site wastewater rules implementation.
Senator Jarvis is recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. In 2019, the Commission of Public Health adopted the rules for wastewater, on-site wastewater systems, and they were delayed due to supply chain interruptions and also training of the local health department. The rules are set to become effective on January 1st, 2024. This bill is the result of the support of many agencies, local environmental health supervisors, stakeholders across the industry. I know of nobody against it. However, we do have a friendly amendment. Senator Craven, I believe, has an amendment.
Senator Craven, for what purpose rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Send forward an amendment.
Send forward your amendment. Clerk will read.
Senator Craven moves to amend the bill.
Senator Craven is recognized to explain Amendment 1.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is purely technical in nature. I have shopped this with bill sponsors in the House and the Senate and request your approval today. Thank you.
Discussion or debate? Senator Meyer, for what purpose you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask Senator Craven a question.
Senator Craven, do you yield?
Sure, Mr. President.
He yields.
Thank you, Senator Craven. I believe that it's technical in nature, but from reading it and referencing the bill, I can't understand what the impact of this is. So can you describe what the impact of this is?
Senator Meyer, there really is no impact, which is why it's technical in nature. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Further discussion or debate on Amendment 1? Hearing none. Question for the Senate is the adoption of Amendment 1 to House Bill 627. All in favor of the amendment will vote aye. All opposed vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the vote, and clerk will record the vote. Senator Lowe? Aye. Senator Chaudhary? Aye. 48 having voted in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment 1 is adopted, and the bill is back before us. Discussion or debate on House Bill 627. Hearing none. Question for the Senate is the passage on second reading of House Bill 627. All in favor will vote aye. All opposed vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the vote, and clerk will record the vote. Senator Lowe? Aye. (47) having voted in the affirmative, 1 in the negative. House Bill 627 has passed its second reading and will, without objection, be read a third time.
The General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
Is there discussion or debate on third reading? Hearing none. Question for the Senate is a passage on third reading of House Bill 627. All in favor will say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and House Bill 627 has passed its third reading. The amendment will be engrossed. The amendment will not be engrossed, and the bill will be returned to the House on the issue of concurrence with the amendment. For concurrence, Senate Bill 382. The clerk will read.
Senate Bill 382, Dental Practice Act changes.
Senator Perry is recognized to explain the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, the House made a few changes to this bill. I think largely they are good, and we're fine with them, but we did find a couple of mistakes and a couple of things left out. So I would ask for you not to concur at this time.
Discussion or debate? Hearing none. Question for the Senate is the motion to concur in the House Committee substitute to Senate Bill 382. All in favor of the motion would vote aye. All opposed would vote no. The bill sponsor asks that you vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the voting. Clerk will record the vote. So 2 having voted in the affirmative, 46 in the negative. Senator Bergen, for what purpose you rise? Senator Bergen from aye to no. Senator Robinson?
Changed my vote. I was following Senator Bergen. Wasn't paying attention.
Sorry, I misled you. Senator Robinson, you may not want to get in that habit. None voting in the affirmative, 48 in the negative. The motion to concur does not carry, and the House will be notified. Reconsideration of vetoed bill, Senate Bill 364. The clerk will read.
Senate Bill 364, Non-Discrim and Dignity in State Work.
Senator Daniel is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the Senate. I want to first just point to the first sentence of the governor's veto message. It says, in North Carolina, the diversity of our people is a strength. And I think all of us in this room agree with that statement. And that's what this bill does, is it protects the diversity of our workforce and state employment. And I want to plagiarize Senator Heiss from something he said on the Senate floor when we were debating this bill, and I wish I had thought about it before the debate then, but he said, when you are a state employee, the government is your employer, and the government should not be requiring its employees to think in a particular manner with regard to political matters. So this bill protects the First Amendment rights of our state employees. It protects the First Amendment rights of our state employee applicants. It seeks to keep the hiring process for non-exempt employees free from political bias. It protects employees who are people who are applying from being compelled to take a certain stance on political or social issues to qualify for a state job, or to be required to undergo certain political trainings as a part of their job duties. This bill is about encouraging and ensuring diversity of thought in state employment, and therefore, Mr. President, I would move that the Senate Bill 364, non-discrimination and dignity in state work, become law, notwithstanding the objections of the governor.
Discussion or debate? Senator Robinson, your light is on. I don't know if that's from last time, or did you want to be recognized? Senator Chaudhary, for what purpose you rise?
Speak on the veto override, Mr. President.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I recognize that we are preparing to take up this veto override that includes the first of 4 bills, I believe, that is an indication that we may be near the end of our legislative session. And I would simply say that we've been accustomed in recent years to reading vetoes on significant ideological differences, voting rights, reproductive rights, education funding, how we approach even diversity, which is reflected in this bill. But I would also say, as we look at the other bills that are upcoming, Mr. President, that there are smaller technical bills where we will read a message that may talk about the fact that the bill may be well-intentioned but could still result in problems. And Mr. President, I share this with you because the broader point here is that the governor of our state can and should play a part in lawmaking, and that's because the governor possesses a statewide perspective that none of us in this chamber has. The governor has a pulse on Princeville and Spring Lake, as well as in Charlotte and Raleigh. And so whatever your personal feelings are on the governor opposing parties, part of legislating is putting aside those feelings and doing the work necessary for the people, and doing our due diligence on legislation ahead of time, making sure that we have buy-in from stakeholders, leaders, and even the governor's office can go a long way in making sure that we craft reasonable, bipartisan, and constitutional bills. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion or debate? Hearing none, the motion before this body, before the Senate, is that Senate Bill 364 become law, notwithstanding the objections of the governor. All in favor of the motion will vote aye. All opposed will vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the voting. Clerk will record the vote. "30 having voted in the affirmative, 18 in the negative. The motion to override the governor's veto of Senate Bill 364 passes by 3/5 of the members present and voting. In accordance with Article 2, Section 22 of the Constitution of North Carolina, Senate Bill 364, together with the governor's objections and veto message, will be sent to the House by special message for reconsideration." Senate Bill 299, the clerk will read.
Senate Bill 299, reimburse late audit costs with sales tax rev.
Senator Barnes is recognized to explain the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is common sense, bipartisan legislation that was supported by both the state auditor and our state treasurer. It passed this chamber unanimously, and it will help to hold local government elected officials accountable. So, Mr. President, I move that Senate Bill 299, reimburse late audit costs with sales tax revenue, become law, notwithstanding the objections of the governor.
Discussion or debate? Hearing none, the motion before the Senate is that Senate Bill 299 become law, notwithstanding the objections of the governor. All in favor of the motion will vote aye. All opposed will vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the voting. Clerk will record the vote. Senator Lowe? No. Senator Adcock? Senator Adcock? 31 having voted in the affirmative, 16 in the negative. Motion to override the governor's veto of Senate Bill 299 passes by 3/5 of the members present and voting in accordance with Article 2, Section 22 of the Constitution of North Carolina. Senate Bill 299, together with the governor's objections and veto message, will be sent to the House by special message for reconsideration. Senate Bill 329, the clerk will read.
Senate Bill 329, Installment Sales Act Amendments.
Senator Perry is recognized to explain the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've heard it said before that regret and fear are twin thieves who would rob us of the day. And if that's true, then I would say that inflation is the silent thief who would rob us of our future. No one is immune to the impact of inflation. None of us. It hits everyone. When we looked at revisions to Senate Bill 329 for the Retail Installment Sales Act Amendment, we had those conversations with many stakeholders. And many of my colleagues in here assisted with this bill in conversations with various groups. And we ended up in a reasonable place where those who would propose the legislation didn't get everything they had proposed, and those who opposed parts of it were able to win concessions. So we reminded people that all businesses, regardless of what they are, they're owned by people. And if no one's immune to inflation, that means the owners of that business aren't immune. Their costs go up. They're paying people more. Their cost of capital is higher. So we had all of these adult conversations